Welcome back to At One Insight World, where we explore the forces shaping our world through a geopolitical lens. Today, we're diving into The End of the World is Just the Beginning by Peter Zeihan, a provocative look at the collapse of globalization and what it means for the future. Published in 2022, this book feels more relevant than ever in 2025 as global trade tensions, energy crises, and regional power shifts dominate headlines. Peter Zeihan, a renowned geopolitical strategist and former vice president at Stratfor, uses his expertise in demographics, energy, and geography to predict a world where nations must fend for themselves. From the Middle East to the U.S., Zeihan's insights challenge us to rethink the global order. In this audiobook summary, we'll explore why globalization is unraveling, how it impacts regions like the Middle East, a focus of our channel, and what the future might hold. Let's get started. Zeihan begins with a bold claim. The era of globalization, which has defined the world since World War II, is coming to an end. For decades, the U.S. acted as the guarantor of global trade, using its navy to secure shipping lanes and its economic power to enforce stability. This system allowed countries to specialize. China became the world's factory, the Middle East supplied oil, and Europe focused on high-tech industries. But Zeihan argues that this system is unsustainable, driven by three key forces: demographics, energy, and the retreat of American power. First, demographics are shifting. Aging populations in countries like China, Japan, and Germany mean fewer workers and consumers, shrinking economies and reducing global demand. China, for instance, faces a demographic cliff. Its population is aging faster than any nation in history, with the workforce shrinking by millions each year. In 2025, posts from a China state media highlight Beijing's struggle to boost birth rates, a sign of the crisis Zeihan predicted. Second, energy markets are fracturing. The U.S. shale revolution, which made America the world's top oil producer by 2018, has reduced its reliance on Middle Eastern oil. Zeihan explains that this shift means the U.S. no longer has a strategic need to police global trade routes, like the Strait of Hormuz, which we discussed in Prisoners of Geography. Without American protection, global shipping becomes riskier. Piracy, regional conflicts, and trade wars disrupt the flow of goods. In 2025, we're seeing this play out. A recent post by a Global Trade Watch reported a 15% drop in container shipping through the South China Sea due to U.S.-China tariff disputes, exactly the kind of fragmentation Zeihan warns about. Third, the U.S. is stepping back from its role as the world's policeman. Zeihan argues that America's post-Cold War commitment to global stability was an anomaly, driven by the need to counter the Soviet Union. With that threat gone, and with domestic priorities like energy independence taking precedence, the U.S. is less willing to intervene abroad, leaving regions like the Middle East to fend for themselves. Let's focus on the Middle East, a region we've explored extensively on this channel. Zeihan dedicates a significant portion of the book to this area, arguing that the decline of globalization will hit the Middle East especially hard, but also create new opportunities for regional powers. First, let's look at Iran. In our previous videos, like the summary of Battlefield Cyber, we discussed Iran's cyber capabilities and its nuclear ambitions. Zeihan adds another layer: Iran's geographic and demographic advantages. Unlike many Middle Eastern countries, Iran has a relatively young population and a diverse economy, with agriculture, industry, and oil. The Zagros Mountains, which we covered in Prisoners of Geography, make Iran a natural fortress, hard to invade. Zeihan predicts that as U.S. influence wanes, Iran will emerge as a regional hegemon, using its position to dominate neighbors like Iraq and challenge Saudi Arabia. In 2025, this seems plausible. China's growing partnership with Iran, including belt and road projects like the Chabahar port, gives Tehran the economic support it needs to project power, as we noted in the 100-year marathon. But Iran's rise won't go unchallenged. Zeihan points to Saudi Arabia as another key player in the post-globalized Middle East. The kingdom has long relied on oil exports and U.S. protection, but with America stepping back and global oil demand shrinking due to renewable energy trends, Saudi Arabia faces an existential crisis. Zeihan argues that the Saudis will need to diversify their economy quickly, something they've been trying to do with Vision 2030. However, their aging leadership and lack of a skilled workforce make this transition difficult. In 2025, Saudi Arabia's pivot to China, with deals like the $10 billion refinery project we mentioned in the 100-year marathon, shows their desperation to find new partners. Zeihan predicts that Saudi Arabia will struggle to maintain its regional influence, potentially losing ground to Iran, a shift that could lead to more proxy conflict in places like Yemen and Syria, further destabilizing the region. What about Israel, another focus of our channel? Zeihan sees Israel as a rare winner in this new world. Despite its small size and lack of geographic depth, which we discussed in Prisoners of Geography, Israel has advantages that will help it thrive. Its young, educated population and high-tech economy make it less dependent on global trade. Israel's energy independence, thanks to natural gas discoveries in the Mediterranean, reduces its reliance on Middle Eastern oil. And its military prowess, backed by nuclear capabilities, ensures it can defend itself even without U.S. support. Zeihan argues that as the U.S. withdraws, Israel will become a regional superpower, filling the vacuum left by America. In 2025, this aligns with Israel's actions, like its preparations to strike Iran's nuclear facilities, which we covered in our earlier videos. However, Zeihan warns that Israel's dominance will come at a cost. Increased isolation and more direct confrontations with Iran and its proxies, like Hezbollah, could make the region even more volatile. Beyond the Middle East, Zeihan examines the global implications of globalization's collapse. Let's start with the U.S., which Zeihan sees as uniquely positioned to weather the storm. America's geography, bordered by oceans, with friendly neighbors in Canada and Mexico, makes it naturally secure. Its shale oil boom and vast agricultural resources mean it can be self-sufficient in energy and food, unlike most nations. Zeihan predicts that the U.S. will retreat into a more isolationist stance, focusing on North American trade with Canada and Mexico rather than global commitments. In 2025, we're seeing signs of this. Ex-posts about U.S.-China trade disputes show America prioritizing domestic manufacturing over global supply chains, a trend Zeihan foresaw. However, this retreat will leave allies like Europe and Japan vulnerable, forcing them to fend for themselves in a more dangerous world. China, on the other hand, faces a grim future in Zeihan's view. While the 100-year marathon highlighted China's ambitions, Zeihan argues that its vulnerabilities will undermine its rise. China's aging population, projected to shrink by 200 million people by 2050, will cripple its economy. Its dependence on imported food and energy makes it vulnerable to trade disruptions, especially as global shipping becomes riskier. Zeihan points to the South China Sea, where China's aggressive claims have alienated neighbors like Vietnam and the Philippines, leaving it isolated. In 2025, China's struggles are evident. Ex-posts about trade disruptions and energy shortages in Chinese cities highlight the cracks in its system. Zeihan predicts that China will fragment internally, with coastal regions like Shanghai prospering while inland areas collapse, a scenario that could lead to political instability and a weaker China on the global stage. Europe, meanwhile, will struggle to adapt to this new reality. Zeihan explains that Europe's post-World War II prosperity relied on globalization, cheap energy from Russia, manufacturing in China, and U.S. security guarantees. Without these, Europe faces energy shortages, economic decline, and security threats. Germany, for instance, can't sustain its industrial base without Russian gas, especially after the 2022 Nord Stream sabotage. In 2025, Europe's energy crisis continues. A recent ex-post by EU Energy Watch reported rolling blackouts in Germany due to gas shortages, a direct consequence of the trend Zeihan describes. Zeihan predicts that Europe will fracture along national lines, with countries like France and Poland emerging as regional leaders, while weaker states like Italy and Spain struggle to survive. What does the future hold in Zeihan's vision? He paints a world of regionalization, where global trade gives way to localized economies. The Middle East will see a power struggle between Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Israel, with no clear winner. The U.S. will thrive in relative isolation, while China and Europe face decline. But Zeihan also sees opportunities. Countries with young populations, like India and Indonesia, could rise as new powers if they can navigate the chaos. Technology will play a key role. 3D printing and automation could help nations become more self-sufficient, reducing reliance on global supply chains. However, Zeihan warns that the transition will be messy, with famines, conflicts, and mass migrations as the old order collapses. In 2025, we're already seeing early signs of this. From refugee crises in the Mediterranean to food shortages in Africa, the end of globalization is indeed just the beginning of a new, uncertain era that let's wrap up. The End of the World is Just the Beginning by Peter Zeihan offers a stark vision of a world where globalization unravels, leaving nations to fend for themselves. From Iran's rise in the Middle East to China's looming decline, Zeihan's insights challenge us to rethink the future of global power. As we navigate 2025 with trade disruptions and energy crises making headlines, his predictions feel eerily prescient. Thanks for joining us on At One Insight World for this audiobook summary. If this sparked your curiosity, grab a copy of The End of the World is just the beginning to explore Zeihan's full argument. What do you think? How will the Middle East or your own country fare in this new world? Share your thoughts in the comments, like this video, and subscribe for more geopolitics content. Until next time, stay curious,